and speakers, and I'm delighted to introduce Rose Parker, and you know which one is Rose, Craig Tyson and Constable Dion Johns, who will speak to us about implementing restorative practice in northern schools. And it's an initiative which is a first of its kind in Australia. Rose and, just listen to me, Rose and Craig are educators, and Dion, of course, is with the, let me just see, the unit, the Youth Action Unit with the Police Department here in the north.
Yes, I'm not going to get up on the stage because I probably want to break into song and dance with a microphone in my hand. I'm Craig Tyson, I'm the School Support Manager of the Learning Service North, not Constable Johns or Rose Parker, so that's pretty obvious. What I want to do in the next half an hour is just take you through the process that we've been involved in and the journey that we've been embarking on since 2008 in relation to the implementation of restorative practice across schools in Learning Services North. But particularly as it relates to trying to reduce the incidence of violence in schools and to address incidents in schools that frequently end up in suspension. So we're going to talk a bit about restorative practice and its place within schools, and also how that links in with the Memorandum of Understanding that we have with Tas Police. Now, to our knowledge, it's the only jurisdiction in Australia where education and police have a partnership or a Memorandum of Understanding around addressing issues that can eventually end up with the youth justice system and around dealing in a proactive way with incidents in schools affecting people that have been the victims of violence and so on. So the extreme cut point of this restorative practice program is around violence, but it certainly has lots of other applications within schools. If I can just take you through a quick story that might help to put restorative practice into context. I remember this date really well. April 24th, 2009, it was a Friday. And at that stage I was principal at Samanoa Primary School. And at about 2:45, the fire alarms went. And we had 600 kids in the school, and it was raining. And we're 15 minutes away from school finishing for the day. And I was about an hour away from getting on a plane to go to Melbourne as a one-eyed Essendon supporter to watch Essendon versus Collingwood in the Anzac Day game. And if you can remember that game, it was the one where David Zaharakis kicked the last goal of the day to win the game for Essendon, so it was a sensational outcome. But the fire alarms went off at 1:45, and I'm thinking, God, how are we going to get out of this? I've got to get on a plane shortly. But then I thought, no, I probably should stop thinking about me, let's think about the kids. Because as with fire alarms, everyone had to vacate the building. So we had 600 kids trudging across the oval in the mud. We had probably about 5 or 6 kids who were on the severe disability register who were wheeled across in their wheelchairs. Quite a few of them were receiving full personal care. So their teacher aides were wheeling them across in their chairs in the mud. Kids all had to line up. It was raining. We had to wait for the fireys to arrive to give us the all clear. We had parents coming into the school saying, I've got to get my kid and take them out early. Can't I go in and get their bag? Can't we leave early? No, we said, no, you can't do it until we get the all clear from the fireys. And the whole problem was started because one little fellow in grade 6 who was standing outside my office had just got his elbow and gone bang on the fire alarm glass and smashed it and caused the alarms to be raised. Luckily, the fireys turned up. With only a few minutes to spare before 3 o'clock, we got the all clear. And that was chaos in itself, because then we had 600 kids that had to go back into class, muddy shoes, get their bags, parents wandering around trying to clear it all up. Kids wheeled across the oval again, and so it was pandemonium. And this little fellow who'd been out lining up with his class was walking back in with the rest of his classmates, and everyone knew it was him. And all the teachers knew it was him, and all the teacher aides knew it was him, and they were saying, oh, I think he's got to be suspended for that. You've got to suspend him, you can't have him here, you've got to kick him out, you can't do that sort of thing. So he ended up outside my office, and the chief fiery turned up. He'd given the all clear, And this little fellow was standing there, and the chief fireman gave him an absolute roasting, saying things like, "Do you realise that if your mother was in a car accident and we had to get called out to that, we had to come here first? Don't you realise what you've done?" Blah, blah, blah. So by the end of that bollocking, this little fellow was cowering in the corner on the ground, sobbing. So I had to ring his mother and say, "Oh, he's done this. I'm afraid he's going to have a couple of days off of that, a couple of days suspension." She wasn't happy. "That's not going to do him any good. He won't know what's going on." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's the way things are. You know, he's got to have his suspension for that." So he went away, had his 3 or 4 days, came back, went back into class. That was it. That was pre-restorative practice at Sammadale Primary. Had I known then about restorative practice, I wouldn't have done that. Would have managed it completely differently. The best process for us to undergo then would have been to put him through a restorative circle with people that had been affected by his actions. So that at the end of that process, he would have been able to say what he was thinking at the time. More importantly, people would have been able to say to him, "This is how it affected us. I was a parent and I had to wait for my child to be released so that we could go. We had an appointment at 3:20. I missed that." Kids could have said, "Well, I needed to get somewhere, and because you hit the fire alarms, I wasn't able to do that." Teachers would have been able to say, "This is how it affected me." At the end of that process, he would have understood the consequences of his actions and how his actions had caused harm to others. Then the next stage of that would be to do what's called reintegrative shaming. So we would have then agreed on an outcome and brought him back in so that not only did he recognise the consequences of his actions, but there would be agreement around what the consequence would be. It may well have been that everyone would have agreed, okay, he comes back to school on Monday and he's agreed to write a written apology to various people. He's agreed to do this, that and the other. We would have avoided suspension, but more importantly, he would have understood. As it was, after he'd been suspended for 2 or 3 days, he came back and he was none the wiser about the consequences of his actions. He didn't understand what he'd done. He just thought, "I've been suspended again." Luckily, later on in that term, after we'd done restorative practice, the next time he did something wrong, we did have a restorative circle with him, and it changed his behaviour for the rest of the year. There were no problems with him or his behaviour from that point onwards. But it was 6 or 7 weeks too late. So that's what restorative practice is all about. I think we'll just have to unmute this screen now. Restorative practice is about involving all those people who've been involved in an incident and getting them together so that they can understand from the perpetrator's point of view how it's affected others, and from the victim's point of view their feelings about the incident that's occurred. So it involves that education where we can make children aware of the consequences of their action and how it's harmed others. And it's all about reintegrative shaming, so the important part is about bringing them back in and working with them again and not marginalising them or leaving them so that they have little understanding of what they've done. So as far as what we've done in learning service so far to date is concerned, as I mentioned, we have an agreement with police whereby schools are working together with police around implementing restorative practice. This came about after a meeting that I held with police in 2008 where there was a young constable by the name of Mick Dalton who was really passionate about restorative practice, and they wanted to find ways where they could address issues of violence in schools. So out of that came the MOU with police around how we deal with violence and how schools would handle situations where there had been a violent incident. It also meant that we were able to divert some children away from the youth justice system. And from the police perspective, the aim of the program is to do just that, so that we don't have as many people that are going through the courts, young people through the courts, as well as reducing the amounts of suspensions and exclusions from school. So an MOU was developed and signed in April 2009 between Learning Services North and Tas Police. We're in the process now, and I think it's next week, Rose, of signing off on that MOU again and extending it for another 3 years. And the local commander, Richard Cowling, is really supportive of that. So in terms of the effectiveness of restorative practice, research across the year has found that it has resulted in significant reductions in inappropriate behaviour, violent actions or recidivism. But it's not a quick fix. It's not something that we can just do in 5 minutes or expect that teachers will go through a workshop for half a day or a full day and be restoratively practiced. It's not something that schools do. They can't just say, yes, we're a restorative practice school, we're doing RP. It has to be really embedded in practice. So what our focus in Learning Services North is to encourage schools not only just to go through the training, but to embed it in their school improvement planning so that it's an integral part of their school-wide positive behaviour support programs. We already have seen that there are significant benefits for schools so far, and there have been reductions in the number of incidences of violence, particularly in secondary schools across the learning service. And strangely enough, parents that are involved in it have actually been really happy with the process. So we don't get a situation where a kid might come home and say, I've been belted, and the parent says to the school, what are you going to do about it? This kid needs to be suspended. We've found that when parents are involved in restorative circles and in restorative practice themselves, they're happy with the outcomes that come out of it, and probably more importantly, they understand the effects that the incidents have had, and that the school and the community and the kids are working together to come out with a positive outcome. So in that respect, it's more about repairing harm than apportioning blame. Restorative practice began in Australia probably about 2007, with a sergeant in New South Wales Police called Terry O'Connell, who is one of the leading lights worldwide now on implementing restorative practice. And what we were going to do was to show you just a short clip. All I can do is show you the slide, because for some reason the video won't work. But if you get a chance, go onto the net and look for Facing the Demons. Just put Facing the Demons into Google, and you should be able to find an Australian Film Archive site where you can see some clips from the documentary that was aired on the ABC a few years ago called Facing the Demons, which is about restorative justice and how those principles are put into place relating to a particularly violent incident. In this case, it was a murder that occurred in New South Wales. Hopefully we're going to show this clip, which just gives you a bit of background to restorative practice, but as I said, unfortunately it's not available for us. But if you go into that website, you should be able to find it. I'll hand over now to Dion, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the MOU with police.
Hopefully I can work this in. This is more technology than we used to, police. It's not a joke. Under the MOU, any assault that happens in schools basically comes through to me. So what happens, Rosie will send a report through to me. I'll access it if I can open it, and then I'll basically look at the incident and discuss it if need be with my colleagues, and then it'll basically be sent through for investigation. What that means also says it depending on the severity of the incident. So if I deem it's an assault, not a school-based fight where it's mutual, what will happen, I'll send it to our CMU, which is a crime management unit, and I'll ask it to be allocated for investigation. So from there, it'll be sent through to someone to investigate. That means it'll be allocated to an officer. It'll be their job in a couple of days to contact the victim involved and say, hey, police, we have the report, we're going to look into the matter. From there, they'll have 14 days to investigate the incident in a timely fashion, as it says there. So it says they're a dedicated team of detectives. When this first came into place, there actually was a couple of detectives who looked into incidents. Now it's allocated to an officer, it could be from Newton Station or from Launceston Station, and they'll go out and investigate. Now it could also be allocated to CIB if it's a serious assault, and we had one of those just recently last year where the matter's now being heard in Supreme Court. As I said, we have a 2-day turnaround for incidents, so that allows everything to be investigated in a timely manner. Prior to this, it might have taken 30 days for the victim to be contacted. But our commander, Richard Cowling, and the previous commander has deemed that the victim must be contacted within 2 days, which obviously allows things to be investigated in a lot quicker fashion. As it says there, the incident may be followed up by a formal caution or a community conference. I don't know if you're aware, but with a formal caution, it's basically dealt with through my office, so myself or one of my other colleagues. What that means, it'll still be a restorative justice session, so the person will come in, the victim will come in, the offender will come in with their parents, etc., and I'll run the circle. So we'll sit down, we'll talk about the incident, so that the offender will outline what happened, then they will refer to the victim, etc., and any other people that are present. So the victim has a chance to have their say, and with a community conference, it's a similar type process, except it's run by an external facilitator, not by police, but we have to be present under the law, along with youth justice and the victim and any other supporting person that's deemed necessary. As it says here, most schools still impose logical consequences, as well as reporting to Learning Services North. So if a report comes through to me and I deem that it's not an assault or it's a mutual fight, the people involved may still be have a restorative session at school and be dealt with at the school itself. So it means things are followed up at both ends. And as you can see from the stats, when this first started, obviously there's a spike, which we've got a laser pointer on this, we do. As you can see, there's a spike there in incidences, and it's steadily declined. A little bit of a spike there, and basically, up until this term, I've had about one report that's come through to me for investigation. So, as that demonstrates, most of the reports are being dealt with at a school level, which in the end, it's better for everyone involved. That means the matters are being dealt with at the school. Obviously the children are learning to get along with each other and they're learning to sort out issues when it happens. For police, that means there's less and less matters going to court or less and less matters clogging up our systems like community conferences or formal cautions, which basically allows things to run more smoothly from our point of view. So under the agreement, under the MOU, that's the same slide, isn't it? Oh, there we go. So any serious incident will be reported to Learning Services North. They'll make a determination and then basically, as I said, it'll be referred to me as to whether investigation should be conducted. When this determines that a serious incident has occurred, as I said, it'll be basically sent out to an officer to investigate and it'll be resolved either through a formal caution, community conference, or it can be sent to court. As I said, the incident from last year that's going through the Supreme Court, even though none of the other offenders that weren't the principal offenders have been dealt with at the Magistrates Court, and they may even be referred back to community conference. So it's up to the magistrate to decide when it gets to that level. I think that is me. On to Rose, Craig.
We've mentioned restorative circles quite frequently in the last few minutes. And we don't want you to think that restorative circles are only useful when there's been an incidence of violence or a particularly nasty incident that's occurred at school. What we're trying to do with schools is to encourage them to use circle work or classroom circles more for teaching purposes, so that whether you have a literacy activity or a numeracy activity or whatever, you can actually use the principles of classroom circles as a teaching tool. That way, children won't just expect that, oh, we're having a classroom circle, something's gone wrong that we need to address and we need to fix. The idea behind that is that kids will get used to the circle principle, used to working in classroom circles, and then when there is a situation where you need to use a circle for restorative processes or purposes, they're accustomed to the process and they can work through it seamlessly. Just very quickly, the history of restorative justice comes from way back in history, and it's nothing new in relation to lots of tribal situations where there's been a focus on shaming, and it's been particularly evident in Maori cultures and in a lot of native cultures in Africa. And shaming is a really important part of restorative that we will talk about shortly. Over to Rose now, who's going to tell us a little bit about how the processes work so far in Tassie. I'll be your assistant.
Thank you. Craig was just mentioning how we try and embed it in schools and have it as part of just the culture at school. So we're looking also at things like symbols. Some schools have it on the major questions on signs around their playground. They have those little statues you can buy with a group of people in a circle, just those visual signs as well, to remind people all the time that they're a restorative school. So what we're looking at is a fairly strict script, if I can put it that way, And we try not to deviate from that too much, although it's obviously can be adapted and to suit the environment, the children. I was just talking to Elizabeth about kids who are non-verbal or severe disability. Some of the latest research says there's no reason at all they can't be included. You would just have to modify things for them. So it might be little pictures or stick-on things or signs or that sort of thing if they're not very good at actually expressing it very well, and clearly that would apply to students with autism who we would traditionally said, well, they can't really do that because they have no empathy generally. There's obviously ways around that as well. So what restorative practice does is underpin the Youth Justice Act, and we try very carefully to involve the victims, the offenders and the wider community. So as Craig was saying, what we would have done years ago is we might have got a couple of kids together, had a chat, or we'd speak on behalf of the victim. And what we found, or what we find, is that really the perpetrator needs to be able to see who has been affected, what harm has been caused, and how that's going to be resolved. So we give people the opportunity to meet and to actually talk, and really the preparation should in fact often take longer than the meeting itself. So really, really clear, a really thorough preparation, so there are no surprises, the facilitator knows what's happening, there shouldn't be any unexpected things out of left field when those people meet. And really it runs along pretty straightforward questions. What happened? We know that you never ask a child, why did you do that? Because you get that really good answer of, don't know, all the time, or a shrug or something like that. So you never actually say, why did you do, or ask, why did you do that? If you ask a child what happened, and you can start that narrative, you're going to get a much clearer idea of what was going on. You can take them back before it happened, after it happened, etc. But that what happened is a pretty straightforward question. And then it really is, well, what were you thinking? Sometimes they'll be able to answer that, sometimes they won't. Or they might just be able to say, my tummy was upset. And from there you can work out or help them articulate how or what they were thinking. So those sort of questions are really straightforward. So what happened? What were you thinking? Who was affected? That's really important. They need to think about that. What do you need? Again, that might take a little bit of time to help them with that. And then most importantly, what can we do to fix it? So it's really, really straightforward questions. And sometimes it could be as quick as, what happened? So what are you going to do to fix it? And that's as quick as it can be. So I had an example the other day. Someone was telling me the two boys were ostensibly playing. One raced over and said, well, he just bit me. And so the teacher got them together, and of course as soon as the teacher said what happened, the other boy said, well, we were playing men and dinosaurs bite men. And the other boy said, oh, you're right. And off they went. And that was it, fixed. Because when you said what happened, it was as simple as that. You didn't have to go into, well, how are you feeling and what needs to be done and how can we fix it. That was it, and it was quite a reasonable explanation, so everybody was fine. He then got strangled because men also strangled dinosaurs, but everything was fine. So it was all good. And we'll often get kids in playgrounds coming up and saying, well, we had a bit of a fight over the monkey bars, but we had a circle and we're right now, we've sorted it out ourselves. And it's really good because it starts to embed that. So in summary, we want those directly involved to try and resolve the conflict or the problem. There's no point in me trying to solve it for them. It's no point coming into a meeting with my solution or consequence already sorted out, because that might not be the way to go. If the whole group agrees that this is over and done with, shake hands, it's finished, and then it might just be an apology letter, why would I then still say, oh, but you're getting 5 days suspension anyway because it looks good and that's what other parents want? That's not what we're on about at all. So if I impose those, I'm doing I'm doing it to you rather than doing it with you. And if you can do it with them, you're going to get a much, much better outcome. God, you're fast on that, Craig. You obviously wasn't going to finish. So really what we're talking about is those who have a stake should be involved. We need to recognise who's been affected. We need to acknowledge how that has affected them and what people need, and it's the victim and the perpetrator who both need something from it. It's not just the victim, and it's really important that you go in understanding that often the perpetrator needs as much support. So we want to repair the harm, we want to put it right, and we want to reintegrate that whole group back into the school or the community without them going away feeling ashamed or that they haven't been listened to. There you are. Thank you.
So Rose mentioned that it's about doing things with people, and this, these domains of practice are just as applicable to any teaching situation or even any situation involving adults or in a workplace or wherever, just as much as they are with kids. What we aim to do is try to work within the top right-hand quadrant of the domain of practice, which is about doing things with kids. So restorative practice is all about working with them to understand the consequences of their actions and how people have been affected. Quite often, we do things to kids. We solve the problems for them. They don't understand. So, in relation to that example that I gave you from Summerdale, the consequence of that was doing something to that boy. He didn't understand what it was all about. If we just left it and done nothing, we would have been neglectful. If we tried to solve the problem for him, he still wouldn't have had ownership, wouldn't have understood, and that would have been doing things for him. Even in relation to teaching kids, what we try to do is to do learning with them. So restorative sits very much within that with area of the domains of practice. Now we talked about restorative circles, so just quickly some of the principles around restorative circles is that it involves whoever needs to be there, the wrongdoers, the people that have been harmed, anyone who's had a stake in the situation, onlookers, friends, community members. It allows all the parties to have an equal say, so equal voice is a very strong principle behind restorative circles. And what we find then is there is a clear understanding from all people involved, all parties, around what the intended outcomes are. And one of the main outcomes from a restorative circle is that there is agreement by everyone around what some of the consequences or next steps should be. So how we're going to make this better is a really important question to ask in a restorative circle situation. Dion's just going to show us now some of the questions that we would use if we were in a restorative circle situation.
This turning out to be hard work, I think, being up and down all the time. With any restorative session, we have basically a number of questions we have to ask. We follow a certain script. So for Tier 1, which would basically be an incident at school or maybe a formal caution with police, which basically start with what happened. So we'd ask the offender or the young person that's responsible what happened, and they'd outline what occurred. We'd also ask what were you thinking at the time. So it might be a specific question, well, why did you punch so-and-so in the face? Oh, I did this, blah, blah. So what were you thinking as you were doing this? And obviously they'd have thoughts going through their head. Never asked a closed question, so why did you do it? And they'll answer, well, I don't know. That's exactly what Rose said. Then we look at who's been affected. So we'd ask them, well, who do you think's been affected by what you've done? And they think, well, the victim, or mum and dad, etc., etc. We'd also, well, who else could be affected? So we look at, well, school, the other pupils that may have seen it. And it's quite surprising if you keep probing how much they open up and actually will think, I didn't think about that, I didn't realise it affected this person. That's when we say, how do you think they've been affected? Well, obviously the victim, well, I punched him, that would have hurt him. Well, who else has been hurt by this, etc. So you keep on following a certain script. When I first started doing this, I soon realised if you don't stick to the script when you first start doing it, you can become distracted and the process doesn't work as easily. That one there, what do you need to do to put things right? So with police, even if someone comes through for an assault, it could be just a letter of apology. It could be just a verbal handshake and I'm sorry. There could be other consequences, but in the end, everyone has to agree to the consequences. I can't impose something on someone and say, well, you've got to do this, because it doesn't work. The victim doesn't feel right or the offender doesn't feel right, and basically the whole process can fail. And now how are you going to put things right? So the young person might say, well, I'll write a letter. I allow them time to think about it before I might suggest something. So the person that's been affected, right, they have a chance to have their say. And this is why the process does work so well. So what do you think when you realise what had happened? And the person will outline, well, this is what occurred to me, this is what I was thinking. What impact has this incident had on you and others? It allows the person that's been affected to say how it's affected them, and also it allows the the offender or the young person to hear how the victim's been affected. What was the hardest thing for you? And it might be the fact it would hurt me. It made me cry if it's a young child. And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And this is where the victim might say, well, I'd like such and such to apologise, or yeah, I would like a letter, or I would like this to happen. Obviously with police, if they come to me for a formal caution, I can look at a range of things. It could be counselling, it could be things like that if the incident requires it. And under the Act, we have as I said, we do have a range of consequences as such, but in the end they have to be agreed upon from all parties. That's me.
I think you can finish off on the last one.
I can finish off apparently.
And then I'll do the last one.
So yearly training, obviously all the teachers involved in schools do conduct training.
Sorry, Leon. Sorry, we're going to skip that bit.
We're going to skip the bit, aren't we?
Yeah, we haven't got time.
Who goes?
So you could just put them all up and then... Yeah, because it's 10 to now.
Do you want to take over, Rose? Is this your turn? Flick them on.
Sorry, we're just going to skip this bit because we're running out of time.
She's a very bossy woman.
Yeah, well, look who I'm working with. Just really what we're doing in learning services at the moment, it's really good. But just one quick story to finish up with. We often have schools will impose, for example, a suspension. We know they don't work, they really just give everyone a bit of a break, but they're not really a great thing to impose. What we've just been able to negotiate now, and I'll give you a quick example, we had a 10-day suspension from a boy at a primary school who behaved particularly inappropriately. The school ran a restorative session in the third day, I think the third day rose again, the third day of his suspension, and all parties agreed, that was the parents, teachers, the children involved, you know, cast of thousands, they all agreed that the outcomes were really good, really positive, and the boy who'd been suspended needed to return to school. That was the best outcome. He returned to school the next day. His suspension was then taken from 10 days to 3 days, and we can now do that officially through the Department of Education. So what we're working hard on is that we have logical consequences for the actions, and it's not just imposed. So again, it's the doing it with them, not doing it to them. So we think that's a really good story, and it gives us a bit more flexibility over what we do, and it just is working very well. And I think in my job, where I get all the parents, any parent who wants to phone in with a question or an issue or usually a complaint, they know the language very well, they know what we're talking about, and I think it can be summed up when a parent said to me a week or so ago, well, it's okay what the school's done, but they could have offered me a circle, and I thought, yes, that's what we're aiming towards. So that was really good, and of course the school then offered them a circle. So there's so much reading, so much more to it than that. Of course, we've just skimmed the surface, but we're really happy with what we do. We've got a great relationship with the unit down with the police, and we do believe it's working really well. Some of you will know in your schools, you know, very well, and I know are doing it already, and others are just starting on that process. So we're just about 3 minutes over time. We're really happy to take any questions if you've got any, or we can just stop and let you get on with the rest of it. So I'll hand over to you with questions.
I'm probably not the most dramatic question, but all I want to know is, do you, series of questions that you ask, do you ask the perpetrator all of the questions and then go around the circle asking everyone all of them, or do you ask the one question around the circle and then the second question around the circle?
Is it on what?
I don't know. But anyway.
Just to answer the question, obviously what happens is we always go to the perpetrator first.
Yeah.
And we'll ask the series, like, tell me about the incident, and then before we move on to the actual victim, we might ask, you know, does that occur? Was that right to the victim? And they'll say, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. Then we might say, well, who thinks been affected by this? To the perpetrator. And we'll go on. So we follow the script, but we don't go around and ask everyone in the group, because in the end, really the victim should have their chance to have their say before anyone else. Because they can sit there and, well, we're not asking any questions, I feel this is a waste of time. Because they're just probably busting to have their say before we move on to, say, the dad or the mum or the counsellor that are there, anything like that. Yeah. So, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, yeah.